You won't remember everything you read. You should use a lookup table instead. I'm Bram Adams, and this is Reading is a System. Let's talk a little bit about our brains. Our brains store meaning, not snapshots. They store relationships between things. You can work on your memory by doing memory training courses. People will sell you books and ideas on how to improve your memory, and some of those things do work, but it's not necessarily something that you can control. If you're born with a photographic memory, perhaps you might be interested in reading the Odyssey and quoting it word for word. And in fact, I guess from what we know about the verbal architecture, there were people in society who could recite the Odyssey allegedly word for word. But with the way that our society works, with the way that books work, it is not necessarily effective or efficient to want to remember everything that you come across in books. And you shouldn't necessarily rate how a book has affected your life by how much you remember from it verbatim. Quizzing helps, but it isn't a sure thing. I think quizzing is important to call out here because it does allow us to give some level of intensity to our brains to show us that something is important. And when something becomes important to the brain, it tends to spend more effort on it. So if you say, hey, I really do want to understand this concept, the gold standard in a lot of ways is to do spaced repetition, which I will talk about for Reading as a System later because I think it's extremely useful for the autodidactic nature of reading in a system kind of way. So the thing is, I don't think when we think about these systems at play here, the system of the reader, the system of books, we're not really trying to fight what is. We're trying to become smarter about what we can deal with. We're trying to think about this a little bit more from an engineering perspective. How do we take what we might conceive of as a problem in this case, which is, hey, how do I remember more from what I read? Ideally, I want to be able to quote back interesting passages to my friends, but we can be smarter about it in our era. So the first thing I want to say is that Control F has come a long way. Digital books make it really easy to find particular passages as long as you're using a really good lookup table method that I'll talk about here in a second. Of course, you can do the same thing with physical books. You can use dog ears, bookmarks, leave notes and margins, but hitting Control F and then typing the exact word that you're looking for is going to be faster. How you store matters. I think that this is really important because, again, the idea is that you want to store in some kind of shorthand format that will allow you to really quickly get at what you're looking for and then get in and get out. But you want the shorthand to ideally be something that you can write fast as well because you don't want to distract from the core process of reading the book itself. On digital reading platforms, you can highlight passages and you can save them into services like Readwise, for example, which I use and I think is a great service. But I think that when it comes to storing, the idea is the same. It's really more about the revisitation and how you find things. So how you search matters. I think this is also really important. If you are remembering a thing that happened to a character, how do you find that in the book? We haven't really gotten to the point with our technology where you can kind of search semantically through books, even though I'm sure that will be coming in the next decade or so. But for now, for most books, you have to search for exact phrases, or you have to remember kind of what page or chapter that the thing that you're looking for happened in when you want to go and reference that book later. So giving yourself, again, a good shorthand format that allows you to both store fast and search fast is really important. I think revisiting in context is OP. So in the past, my thought process was really kind of, let me move these all into a separate commonplace book. And I still do that. I still think that's a necessary attribution to be able to see all of your ideas at a kind of meta level and then kind of recombine them in different and interesting ways that are outside of their book. But to kind of reset the scene of a crime in a book and jump back to where you found the initial passage really kind of allows your brain to kind of physically re-enter that space and allows you to kind of lock in, I think, a little bit more. If you just see a quote out of context, it can be kind of jarring and you won't necessarily know why you saved it. But if you go back to it in the context from which you found it, it tends to be much more effective. So this is where the key value lookup thing comes in. In computer science, you learn about these things called hash maps or dictionary lookups, which allow you to use this thing called Big O, which is basically a speed notation of how long it takes to find something. And if you know the exact key, it's called an O1 because you don't have to search through an entire list to find something. It immediately jumps to that key and then immediately jumps to the memory value where the thing is stored. So we're trying to recreate that in a lot of ways with the books we're reading. We're not trying to create a value lookup, because a value lookup means that you're writing the whole thing out and then you have to go back to it. And again, even though revisiting is OP, there's not everything that you're going to want to revisit, right? And then you also don't want your keys to be useless. If your keys are useless, you'll never find it. So remembering a phrase or an easy key, not an entire passage. I just mentioned that. And here's my version that I'm doing right now. It's called Entity Shorthand. And you can see here, I wonder if I can do like, yeah, I can just show my mouse. This is the book. So the book is like B5. I think B5 in this particular Field Notes journal is Lee Kuan Yew's Grand Master interview, where they're interviewing Lee Kuan Yew and asking him what he thinks about the world. He was the dictator / prime minister of Singapore and brought them from a third world country to a first world country. And so on book 5, page 9, I liked what he was saying about around the word technology. So if I was searching this in my Kindle, what I would do is I would search technology, and then I would look for technology, because technology might be written multiple times in the book, right? This is the idea of like the importance of having a good key instead of a bad key. So I want a good key, so I have technology, but then I also have the page number of the technology that I saw it on, so I can go back to that exact page number. Then I do these triple dots here. This basically allows me to say that I'm continuing within the same book. So this was also on page 9, dominate. Then we go over to page 10, English, page 12, stability, 13, yada, yada, yada. So this actually fills up this whole page. An advantage of this method, which I'll talk about in the Entity Shorthand video on its own, is that you can actually kind of also see a log of how my reading was going with this book. So I started on page 9 at the bottom here with 26, page 26. I do quiet U-turn. Apologies if you can't read my handwriting. But this is a really fast storing method, because all you have to write is the page number if it's not on the same page, and then the words that you're going to be searching for, and then when you look them up later, you type Control F, you type beat you or let us start, and then you find it on the exact page because you know it's on page 23. That's the one you're looking for. You don't have to do exactly Entity Shorthand. This is just, again, the idea that you shouldn't necessarily want to remember things. What our brains are meant to do is they're meant to process information, a lot of the information, and find meaning between things, and you really don't want to get in the way of that. So I think trying to remember every single fact from a book so you can kind of reference it in conversation is kind of a waste of time. And you don't need to be doing it. You can always reference the ideas that you were looking up later, because you remember, oh, I do remember reading that in the Lee Kuan Yew book, and I remember that it was something about technology that was really interesting to me, or America's can-do approach, so I can just found it, you know? So I think that's important. So thank you for watching. There's a playlist with other strategies, and there's a website with a core set of strategies, as well as a cart that you can set up with your own strategies to practice. Have a good one.